War has always been about strategy, deception, and ruthless efficiency. Throughout history, a handful of brilliant tactics have determined the fate of empires, crushed mighty armies, and reshaped the world as we know it. Today, we bring you 10 genius war tactics that changed history forever. Ancient Greece, a land of warriors and philosophers, saw one of the most revolutionary battlefield strategies, the Oblique Order. Before its introduction, battles were simple head-on clashes, relying purely on numbers and brute strength. But then came Epaminondas. At the Battle of Leuctra, he redefined warfare by concentrating most of his forces on one side while the rest of his army weakened and slowly retreated. The result? A devastating victory over the mighty Spartans. This tactic proved that superior positioning and focus could triumph over sheer numbers. The Macedonian king Philip II had an even bolder idea. He introduced the deadly tactic of penetration of the center, a move that required elite troops to punch a hole straight through the enemy's heart. At the Battle of Chaeronea, he unleashed his strongest forces right in the middle of the enemy lines, breaking their formation and leaving them divided, vulnerable, and utterly doomed. But this was a double-edged sword. If the attack failed, the army could be encircled and annihilated. A high-risk, high-reward maneuver that only the best commanders could execute. Julius Caesar, one of history's greatest military minds, knew that deception was key. At the Battle of Pharsalus, he pulled off a brilliant hidden flank maneuver. While his cavalry engaged the enemy, he concealed a group of elite infantry behind them. As Pompey's forces charged forward, Caesar's hidden troops ambushed them from the side, turning the tide of the battle in an instant. This single move led to Pompey's crushing defeat and cemented Caesar's control over Rome. But if we're talking about genius battlefield tactics, nothing compares to Hannibal's masterpiece at Cannae. The Carthaginian general perfected the deadly art of double envelopment, where a seemingly weak center lured the Romans in while the flanks moved forward, closing in like a deadly trap. As the Romans realized they had been surrounded, it was already too late. They were annihilated in one of the most brutal defeats in military history. Hannibal's strategy remains a textbook example of how a smaller force can outmaneuver and destroy a much larger army. A similar method was used centuries later at the Battle of Manzikert by the Seljuks, in what is known as the crescent formation. Instead of fighting head-on, the Seljuks allowed their center to fall back while their flanks stretched out the Byzantine army. As the enemy lost cohesion and overextended, the Seljuks swiftly encircled them, turning what seemed like a retreat into a stunning victory. A brilliant tactic that shattered an empire. Deception didn't end there. The feigned retreat was another devastatingly effective strategy. Used by both the Romans at Pydna and the Polish-Lithuanian forces at Grunwald, this tactic involved an intentional, slow retreat, luring the enemy into overextending their lines. When the enemy forces broke formation to chase them down, the retreating forces suddenly turned and counterattacked, surrounding their now disorganized foes. This tactic required discipline, timing, and absolute coordination, but when executed correctly, it resulted in total victory. For the nomadic warriors of the steppes, mobility was the key to dominance. The hit-and-run tactic, perfected by the Parthians at the Battle of Carrhae, turned slow-moving armies into sitting ducks. Horse archers would attack, retreat, and then strike again, wearing down the enemy with relentless precision. The famous Parthian shot, where archers fired backward while retreating, made pursuit nearly impossible. This tactic humiliated the Romans and showed the world that speed and agility could defeat even the most disciplined legions. But cavalry wasn't the only way to outmaneuver an opponent. The Cantabrian Circle was another devastatingly effective strategy used by horse archers, where riders moved in a continuous loop, showering the enemy with arrows while never staying in one place long enough to be counterattacked. This constant barrage of fire weakened and exhausted the enemy, forcing them to break ranks, leaving them vulnerable to annihilation. On the ground, infantry formations evolved over centuries to become nearly impenetrable fortresses. The Schiltron formation, used by the Scots during their wars of independence, turned groups of pikemen into deadly hedgehogs, capable of stopping even the most powerful cavalry charges. Though vulnerable to missile attacks, these formations proved invaluable in holding the line against superior numbers, allowing outnumbered forces to survive and even win battles against overwhelming odds. And finally, we arrive at one of the greatest battlefield innovations in history, the Roman legion triplex aces. More than just a formation, This system gave the Roman army unparalleled flexibility. Dividing their forces into 3 distinct lines based on experience, they could absorb attacks, rotate fresh troops, and adapt to any situation. At the Battle of Zama, the Romans even used strategic gaps in their ranks to let Carthaginian war elephants pass harmlessly through before launching their counterattack. This level of discipline and adaptability made the Romans the most formidable military force of the ancient world. But the genius of the Roman legion triplex aces didn't stop there. This formation wasn't just about endurance, it was about overwhelming the enemy through sheer tactical superiority. The first line, the hastati, were young and aggressive, acting as the shock troops to absorb the initial brunt of the fight. If they faltered, they would fall back through the manipular gaps, allowing the hardened principes to step forward and continue the assault. And if the battle dragged on, the final, most elite warriors, the triarii, stood ready, their presence alone a signal that the fight was reaching its climax. This rotating system gave Roman legions an almost mechanical efficiency, always fresh, always organized, always ready for the next move. It was warfare perfected, a formation so effective that even centuries later, it influenced the structure of modern military tactics. No army at the time could match their ability to adapt mid-battle, turn the tide, and annihilate opponents who relied on static, inflexible formations. From flanking ambushes to masterful deceptions, these war tactics shaped history, proving time and time again that strategy wins battles, not just brute force. Which of these tactics do you think was the most genius? Let us know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this deep dive into history's greatest battlefield strategies, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. More epic war stories are on the way, so stay tuned.